Imagine putting in years of hard work, saving consistently, and then reaching a point where your money starts outperforming your own efforts. Your 9 to 5 can't compete with your investments anymore. Your portfolio begins earning more than your salary. This isn't a fantasy, it's simple math. And there's a specific moment when your own contributions become less important than what your money is doing on its own. There's a threshold, somewhere roughly between $20,000 and $170,000 invested, depending on how much you add each year, where something shifts. Before that point, your savings depend mainly on what you put in. After it, compound growth takes over. Your investments start generating more than you can realistically contribute from your income. From there, time becomes your strongest financial asset. As Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's longtime partner, put it, the first $100,000 is a bitch. The reason is straightforward. At around a 7% annual return, $100,000 produces about $7,000 per year without any additional effort. That's effectively income generated passively by capital alone. So what determines this crossover point? It's actually quite simple. Take your annual investment amount and divide it by your expected rate of return. That result gives you the portfolio size at which your investment gains start matching your yearly contributions. For example, if you invest $5,000 per year and expect a 7% return, you divide 5,000 by 0.07. The result is approximately $71,429. That's the point where your portfolio growth begins to rival what you're actively adding yourself. That's your magic number. Once your portfolio reaches roughly $71,000, a 7% return generates about $5,000 per year, which matches your annual contribution. From that point on, investment growth starts matching and then exceeding what you add yourself. The same logic scales depending on how much you invest annually. If you contribute $12,000 a year at 7%, your crossover point is around $171,000. If you invest $6,000 a year, it drops to about $86,000. The ratio stays consistent. Once you reach roughly 20 times your annual contribution, compound growth starts taking the lead. Here's how this plays out over time. If you invest $500 a month, $6,000 a year at a 7% return. After 10 years, you've contributed $60,000. Your portfolio grows to about $83,000. That extra $23,000 is entirely from investment returns, around 38% of the total. At this stage, your contributions are still doing most of the heavy lifting. After 20 years, you've invested $120,000. Your portfolio reaches roughly $246,000. Now the market has added about $126,000 on its own, more than you personally contributed. The crossover point typically happens somewhere around year 11 or 12, often without you really noticing it in real time. After 30 years, your total contributions are $180,000. The portfolio grows to about $567,000. Here, $387,000 comes from compounding. That's nearly 70% of your wealth generated by returns rather than labor. After 40 years, you've contributed $240,000 in total, but your portfolio reaches around $1.2 million. At this stage, roughly $960,000 comes from compound growth alone. The takeaway is simple. Early on, your money works for you slowly, but once compounding passes a certain threshold, it becomes the dominant force, and your contributions start to matter less than time in the market. At this point, your own contributions make up only about 20% of your total wealth. The remaining 80% comes from compounding. Your money generating returns, those returns generating more returns, and so on. That's the snowball effect of compound interest. This is why starting early gives such a powerful advantage. It's unfair in the best way possible. A 25-year-old who invests $500 a month can end up with around $1.2 million by retirement. A 35-year-old doing the exact same thing ends up with roughly $567,000. The difference isn't effort or discipline, it's time. A 10-year delay removed a massive portion of potential growth. To put it another way, a 25-year-old might only need to invest about $381 per month to reach $1 million by retirement. A 35-year-old would need around $820 per month. By 45, that requirement jumps to about $2,025 per month. Every decade of delay significantly increases the cost of reaching the same goal. One analysis even suggests that a dollar invested in your 20s can be worth over 100 times more than a dollar invested in your 50s. The outcome is the same, but the effort required grows dramatically with time lost. Consider this example. Maria starts investing $3,000 per year at age 21 and continues for 15 years, then stops completely at 36. She never adds another dollar. Her total contributions are $45,000. Jim, on the other hand, starts later at 36. He also invests $3,000 per year, but he continues for 30 years straight until age 66, contributing a total of $90,000. The surprising part is how these two paths compare over time. Despite investing for twice as long and putting in twice as much money, Jim doesn't necessarily outperform Maria in the final outcome, because Maria's early start gave her investments decades more time to compound and grow. Double what Maria contributed, and you'd assume Jim comes out ahead. But in this scenario, Maria still has more at retirement. Even though she invested only $45,000 and stopped 30 years earlier, her money had decades more time to compound. Jim's larger $90,000 contribution simply didn't have the same runway. The conclusion is straightforward. Time outweighs raw contribution. This is also where many investors make a costly mistake: fees. On paper, they look insignificant, 1%, 0.5%, or even less. But compound growth amplifies their impact just like returns. For example, starting with $500,000 invested over 30 years at a 7% return, the difference between fee structures is massive. At a very low expense ratio, like 0.03%, typical of broad index funds, the portfolio could grow to about $3.77 million. At a 1% fee, common with many financial advisors, the final value drops to roughly $2.87 million. That's nearly $1 million lost to fees over time, even though the difference initially looks small. Jack Bogle, founder of Vanguard, famously showed that high-fee structures can consume the majority of long-term returns, leaving investors with only a fraction of what the market actually generated. The data on active management reinforces this. SPIVA scorecards consistently show that most actively managed large-cap funds, around 87% over 10 years, fail to beat their benchmark. Over longer periods like 15 years, sustained outperformance becomes even rarer. The implication is simple: you're often paying more for worse results. Low-cost index funds are designed to track the market efficiently instead of trying to beat it. Companies like Fidelity offer funds with near-zero expense ratios, while Vanguard and Schwab typically charge only a few hundredths of a percent. In investing, minimizing fees is one of the most reliable ways to preserve long-term returns. That's roughly $2 to $3 per year for every $10,000 invested, less than what most people spend on coffee in a single week. Now, a common concern is market crashes. What if you invest right before a downturn? It's a fair question, but it leads to the wrong conclusion. During the 2020 COVID crash, the market fell about 34% in a matter of weeks, yet it recovered in roughly 5 months. The 2008 financial crisis saw a 54% drop, but recovery took around 4 years. Even the Great Depression crash of 1929, which erased nearly 89% of value, eventually recovered as well. The broader pattern is clear. In most major market declines of 20% or more, the S&P 500 has historically recovered within about a year in many cases. And across rolling 10-year periods since the 1950s, long-term investors who stayed invested almost always finished in profit. In fact, 2024 alone saw dozens of all-time highs. Historically, the market trends upward, consistently and over time. The real risk isn't market crashes themselves. It's investor behavior during those crashes. Studies show that while the S&P 500 returned around 25% in 2024, the average investor only captured about 16.5% due to panic selling and poor timing. Over the long run, the index has averaged roughly 10.35% annually, while the average investor has earned closer to 3.66%. That difference is largely caused by emotional decision-making. In other words, the biggest destroyer of wealth isn't fees or fund choice, it's fear. That's why the strategy is simple. Automate investments and avoid reacting emotionally to volatility. Markets will rise and fall. Your job is to stay invested and keep contributing. Looking at the broader picture in the U.S., the average 401k balance is around $148,000, but the median is only about $38,000, meaning half of people have less than that. For those nearing retirement age, the median is roughly $87,000, which is often insufficient for decades of expenses. Nearly half of households have no retirement savings at all, and a large portion of high earners still live paycheck to paycheck due to lifestyle inflation. The key takeaway is that simply being informed already puts you ahead of many people financially. A practical plan looks like this. Take advantage of employer retirement matches. It's effectively free money. Invest in low-cost index funds like Total Market or S&P 500 funds. Automate contributions. So consistency doesn't depend on willpower. Calculate your crossover point, annual contribution divided by expected return. Stay invested through volatility instead of reacting to it. Ultimately, compound interest is one of the most powerful forces in finance. The crossover point, where your money starts working harder than you do, is real and measurable. Every year you delay pushes that point further away. And the core idea remains simple. Time in the market matters more than timing the market.